Parents, teachers, guardians, and mentors. We can all agree you've got big shoes to fill, and it may feel like they're always getting bigger and more daunting. Welcome to Parenting Adventures, where we aim to be a beacon of support and knowledge for those navigating the complexities of parenting. Each episode, we bring on experts to walk us through the most pressing issues facing families, with evidence-based, practical strategies. And if school struggles are part of the puzzle, check out how Tutor Teach can help. Now, let's dive into the episode.
Do you ever feel like modern parenting has become such a balancing act between giving your kids everything they need and stepping back to let them grow? I'm your host, Lara, and today we're joined by Dr. Alex Russell, a clinical psychologist and expert in children's emotional development and parenting. Dr. Russell is the author of Drop the Worry Ball: How to Parent in the Age of Entitlement, a must-read for parents navigating today's complex world of overparenting and helicopter tendencies. With over 2 decades of experience in psychotherapy and consulting with schools, teachers, and parents, Dr. Russell brings a wealth of knowledge on how to raise independent, resilient kids who are prepared to take on real-world challenges. In this episode, we dive into the pitfalls of overparenting, the concept of giving kids an apprenticeship in reality, and how allowing them to face challenges helps build emotional strength and independence. If you've ever worried about how much to step in or step back as a parent, this conversation will offer practical insights and a fresh perspective. Stay tuned to learn how you can drop the worry ball and foster a healthy, balanced relationship with your child. This is one episode you won't want to miss. Dr. Russell, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. Can you start by sharing a bit about your background and what inspired you to focus your work on children's emotional development and parenting?
I'm a clinical psychologist in Toronto, and like most clinical psychologists who work with children, over the last 20 years, we've really started to work with parents as well, because whether parents are aware of it, I think we can say this: parenting has never been so challenging. And I know that's a weird thing to say because we've been raising children for, 15,000 years and 5,000 of it in civilizations like this. But it really has never been like this. The onus of responsibility on parents has never been so great. The challenges of childhood development have never been so great either. And so, I love working with kids and have my whole life, but over the last 15 years, like most clinical psychologists, we've all started to learn how to support parents more and more. And so you asked how I got inspired. Well, it's inspiration, but it's also necessity.
Yeah, 100%. And it does. It starts from the top down, because if a parent doesn't have the right tools to support their child, it's good to bring the parents into this type of therapy, because I know, speaking for myself, we want to do the best we can as parents. And so having as many resources and tools in our tool belt helps.
Well, we feel so responsible for our child's outcomes. And of course, in a certain sense we are, but our kids are responsible for their own outcomes as well. And what that means is, because we feel so responsible about our kids' outcomes, when they experience challenges and failures, it often feels to us like we're failing. We're having a hard time giving kids the space they need to be challenged, to screw up, and to learn from their screw ups.
Definitely. So in your book, Drop the Worry Ball, you discuss the idea of overparenting and how it impacts children. Can you explain what overparenting looks like and why it can be so detrimental, and where this new style of parenting came from?
Well, let's talk about, let's call it the overparenting, if you like. Can I do a little graph? Can you see my hands are axes, right? So on this axis, we can put taking responsibility for yourself. From 0% responsible to 100% responsible. And on this axis, we'll put time, 0 years old to 18 years old, when he leaves your home for Frosh Week, right? Okay, which is summer camp with alcohol, just so you know. So let's look at a child's curve on this graph. So here's our responsibility scale. When he's 0.0 years old, how responsible for himself is he? Sort of 0. But by the time he's 18, how responsible does he need to be? 100. He lives in Halifax or wherever, right? He needs to know when to stop drinking and start studying. So he's got 18 years to go from 0 to 100. Now let's look at your parental curve. When he's 0.0 years old, how responsible for himself, how responsible for him are you, the parent? You're 100% responsible because he's only 0. But by the time he's 18, how responsible do you need to be? And the answer is you've got to get to 0. Because if you don't, he doesn't get to 100. These two curves, if you can see them on my table here, these two curves are mathematically related. 100, 0, 99, 1, 98, 2, 9. This curve doesn't come up unless this curve goes down. So, this is the curve of childhood resiliency, but it's also a curve of a child learning to be anxious on his own behalf. He's now worried about, if I don't study for that midterm, I'll fail. And unless the parents let go of controlling those things, the child will not learn to pick them up for himself. So we not only have an outbreak of anxiety among our children, we have a lot of very immature children with parents carrying too much of the worry for them. And owning the responsibility too much. That's one way to think about the overparenting.
That curve, very, very visual and so interesting. You've got to give your kids the tools and space to get to where they need to be, but then that means your parenting style has to change every step of the way and has to evolve and whatnot. And I think that's hard. That's hard for the parent. That's hard for the child.
It's hard, but parents know that it's essential and it's very respectful. Because what you're doing is you're believing in your child's capacity to manage himself. And when you overparent, it's actually disrespectful because you're failing to appreciate his emerging competencies. And I'll give you a very obvious example. All parents are through this. So when your little guy was 18 months old, he suddenly got up on his legs and wanted to run around in the world. And you were anxious. Well, you should be, because there's a big set of stairs that he could go tumbling down. You put up a baby gate. Good. You probably taped some styrofoam to the end of that pointy table. Okay, fine, because you're doing the worrying for him. He's only 18 months old. That's good. But notice that all of us change. Within a couple of years, let's say that boy is now 3.5 years old. You go to the park with him and you let him run around like a crazy person. Yay, good parent. And you're doing it not because he's perfect at running around. You're doing it because you realize not if, but when he wipes out, he'll be able to handle it. And that's such an important building block of life. He did wipe out and it hurt. And he looked at you ready to freak out. Mom, gravity, like this. And you went, ouch. Ow, you helped him understand his experience and he became a little bit more anxious about gravity. And that's a good thing. So if we go back to our curves, this childhood curve is also a curve of a child taking on anxiety for himself, becoming anxious on his own behalf. And it starts right away with things like running around in the world. And there's a whole bunch of other things that follow after running around. Going to school, managing his homework. Parents, when do you want to be out of managing your kid's homework? You're aiming for the end of grade 6. That's when he'll have all the tools he needs. He may not be the excellent student that you'd like him to be, getting A pluses, but I can guarantee you that if you step back, he will become anxious on his own behalf and make sure he gets his work done. That's different than managing his screens, by the way. That comes later in our timetable. So all the way along, there's all kinds of examples we could populate on these curves to help parents understand, yeah, you do need to manage and protect your child early on, but then you have to respectfully turn autonomy over to them and let them often make some painful, non-catastrophic failures from which they can learn.
It's interesting that the school side of things, we have some parents that come to us at Tutor Teach and they'll say, my child has actually asked for a tutor. They want support. And I always applaud that so much because the buy-in is there. And the child's recognizing, I don't have the tools, which means the parent's done a good job in allowing their child the space to recognize that themselves. And that is a hard thing. Like, I'm going to keep using the word hard throughout all this. And I don't know if it's the right word, challenging, conflicting, but it's true where, and also it's a world of pressure where the idea of, letting your child run wild at the playground, but then you have other parents looking at you like you're not doing a good enough job, you're not protecting your child. So there's stigmas associated with that growth as a parent also.
Absolutely. It is so hard to do this these days. And I'm glad you mentioned that scene in the park. I often get parents to think this through, actually. We can do it right now. Like, let's just imagine you're at the park with your 4-year-old and he's gotten into the sandbox and I don't know, maybe he got in a fight over some sand toys in the sandbox and in the tussle he's bonked a little girl on the head with her sifter and she started to cry. Okay, I just want you to, so there's sort of a scene in the sandbox and I want you to, parents, you can picture another adult maybe closer to the sandbox than you, and he talks to your boy sternly. Hey, that's not okay. You can't just take her stuff. You made her cry. Now give it back. It's not all right. And your boy's like, "Well," something like that. This is a hot moment for us modern parents. And I often ask parents, okay, how would you feel in this moment? Because parenting is an emotional activity. And if you can name your emotions, you can tame them. But if you don't name how you're feeling in a hot moment like this, those feelings will drive your actions. And you can probably guess what most parents feel in this. Well, you're a parent. What are your two emotions? Let's say that's your boy. How would you feel as that parent, as that all unfolds in the sandbox and the other guy stands up? How would you be feeling?
I'd feel embarrassed that someone else felt like they need to step in, but I'd also feel very frustrated that somebody stepped in.
Exactly. So those are the two most common responses. One woman said shame, but yeah, like he just brought shame to the whole family. So yeah, you're embarrassed as if you just bonked her on the head with a sifter. And secondly, you're kind of angry at the other parent for stepping in and taking onto your turf. Those reactions tell you something. They tell you how deeply us modern parents identify with the parenting role. We really see ourselves as being on the hook for our kids' behavior. Now, let's think about what's the best thing to do in this situation, because as long as there's been a real misdemeanor, and here there was like both theft and assault. So yeah, there was a real misdemeanor, okay? And let's say the other adult was appropriate. I know I was a bit strong, but let's say there was no F-bombs or anything like that. So there's a real misdemeanor and the other adult was firm but fair. There's no doubt that the best thing you could do is stay in your park bench. But I'm going to suggest most parents are not going to sit in that park bench. They've got to show the rest of the neighborhood that they're on this, that they're not okay with this behavior. And maybe you got to push that guy over on your way, because you're mad at him, right? And so what you're going to do, if you don't think about it, you're going to get out of that park bench and get into your kid's face and say, come on, don't, you're going to reparent. And what's best for your child? There's a clear scientific right answer to that question. Assuming there was a real misdemeanor and the other adult was appropriate, the best thing you could do is stay in that park bench and maybe thank that parent later. Why? Because in the first instance, there was a natural consequence. When your boy acted badly in the community, something happened that was really upsetting. It made him anxious. He was checked. It was really good. But what does he learn if instead you get into his face and reparent him? He learns when I do dumb stuff, mom freaks out. And rather than learn how to manage himself in the big world, he learns how to manage you, mom or dad. And you, mom, you become the custodian of his reality, doing the worrying for him. I do, it's an important thought experiment, parents, because it's a reminder that we just feel so on the ball, like on the hook for our kids' behavior. And what it means is we're having a really hard time giving our kids the space they need to screw up and learn from the screw up.
Very counterintuitive. Now I'm in the trenches of young parenthood. I get an email about my kiddo reacting a certain way, and right away I'm asking him, well, why'd you do that? Or what did you do? Or why didn't you do this instead? And so then I'm guiding him in his reactions. And it's hard to take a step back and to just let them feel the feels and navigate their own moral compass in those moments. And how young do you start peeling away?
Well, that's a really good question, because as these curves tell you, it's all about the timing. And we've got to add another piece in as we talk about this. We're talking about anxiety, and that you want your child to slowly become adaptively anxious in the big world. You guys, you're not trying to raise children without anxiety. They'll die. It's a really useful and essential emotion. What you're trying to do is raise children who slowly take on a little bit of anxiety at a time, and they have skin in the game. So that's your objective. The other thing you do as a parent, though, is you teach your children right from wrong. You teach them how to be a good human, and that's on you, parents. No one else does that. That's a totally parent task to create their work ethic and their how they are polite in public and all of those kinds of things. That's completely from you, and it's a moral task. And it's really done primarily in the first 5 or 6 years of life. In those first years, let's picture that 4-year-old. Let's just say he just stole a cookie from the cookie jar before dinner, and you come in and say, "That's not okay." He feels like a bad boy. He feels guilt. Guilt is the emotion that we can conjure up in our children because we're kind of like gods, especially in those early years. We have the power of God, and our disapproval is crushing to our children. We have awesome, AWE, awesome power in their minds. That's a really important part of child development. You do want to develop those, what Freud called the superego in your child, that part of your mind that says thou shalt and thou shalt not. But as your kids get older and become 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you want to treat them as human beings with the superego rather than wag your finger in the face all the time. So if they do something stupid at age 10 that you know they know better, you're best off saying, "Well, I know you know better. Did you apologize?" Rather than say, "That's not okay." So yeah, like one of the keys to parenting is understanding that you have to build that moral center. But as your children grow up and get into the middle school years and then into high school, you really have to respectfully let them take on the world in their own way. And when they make mistakes, give them some space to learn from it.
It's such good advice. It really is. And it's a whole different tone to parenting for sure. So you said that kids today are missing an apprenticeship in reality. What do you mean by that? What are some of the long-term effects of not allowing children to practice handling real-world challenges?
We infantilize them, So as I was saying, we have kids that are not only behind in taking on anxiety adaptively, we have a generation of pleasers and appeasers. That kids used to play when the adults weren't watching. I mean, for the first 2,000 years of human history. Now, children play only when they're provided the right play equipment and all the parents are watching. And so they're not actually mucking about in the real world and figuring out what works and doesn't work, making mistakes and learning from the mistakes. When my kids were really young, we went up for a cottage holiday on our island we share with cousins, and I remember packing the car with floaty noodles and squirt guns and Nerf guns and toys and all this stuff we brought. It hardly fit in the car. And we got to the cottage, and what did the kids decide to do with their cousins? They went off into the woods and they cleared a space and they sharpened sticks and they had gladiator wars with sharpened sticks. And I know all fun and games till someone loses an eye, but they had so much fun doing it. And I'm sure there were moments of real childhood anxiety. My son Sam would have been 6 and he needed to go into the gladiator ring with his cousin Dougie, who was kind of a little bit crazy and 3 years older than him with a bigger sharp stick. And you know that there was but they learned to regulate themselves. They started to have their own referees for the gladiator wars. When we let kids play in reality, they learn how to take on reality.
There's two things I want to say about that. One is what we've done a podcast about, this is screen time and how that all alternates takes them out of the reality. But the other thing is, as a parent, it feels like a very scary world when every time I go online, I'm seeing news articles and stories about kids being harmed and, just through lack of parenting or through lack of supervision. So how do you trump those things?
Yeah, it's true. Your parental anxiety is there for a good reason. It's there to keep your children safe. So it's a balancing act. Like I said, at 18 months, you'd be a negligent parent if you didn't put that baby gate up at the top of the stairs. But by the same token, you're not giving your child what he needs if you haven't 2 or 3 years later shifted and now respected his capacity to take on the danger of running around in a park by himself, even though non-catastrophic painful failures can happen. So that's your job, parents, is as long as the failures are going to be close to catastrophic, for sure, protect. But as soon as your child is into a stage where what's threatening is non-catastrophic painful failure, it's time to let them take it on for themselves. I'll give you another sort of easy early life example: Halloween candy. You've got a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, and you're coming home and they've got a big bag, tummy aches and wired on sugar, and you want to manage it. But honestly, you can leave it with her, and what's the worst that's going to happen? Maybe she has a little barf barf. But again, if you can not with, and then when you come and notice she's had too much, if you can be compassionate, oh, you had a little barf, help her clean up, I can guarantee you she'll be an awesome Halloween candy manager after that.
What about screens?
So we sort of, in our practice here, and when we support parents, we really talk about the timetable of things, like on these curves, when to manage and when to let go. And I mentioned that the time to really turn homework responsibility over to your child is by the end of grade 6. That's when they can really manage school for themselves. But lots of kids are not able to manage screens yet by the age of 11. In fact, some kids aren't even really able to manage it at age 13 because it's like heroin for them. Like there are some kids, it's really, really compelling and, well, frankly, addictive. And so, those kids, some of those, and not all kids, but some kids do need parents to manage those screens right into high school, grade 9, and even possibly grade 10. Now, if you're managing your child's screens at age 15, that's terribly infantilizing. He's not going to like it, that's for sure. But if the alternative is he's just gonna game all night long and never go to school, then the benefits outweigh the costs, even though you'll have to let it go by grade 11. So screens are a real issue, but they're a real issue for all of us parents. So I really want to encourage you, you've got a 3 or 4-year-old and you're going to the park at 10 o'clock in the morning and you leave your home and you've got that, you probably still call it a diaper bag and it's got some snacks and some baby wipes and you've got your own phone in your pocket and you get to the park and your kid begins to climb on the jungle gym, your hand's probably going for your phone. You've been up since 6 a.m. This is your first quote moment to yourself. I get it. And you're going to want to crush candy or play a Sudoku, in my case, whatever it is, some mindless thing that we do on our phone. But if I could only encourage you just to resist the urge to pick that bloody device up and realize that while this is your first moment to yourself, it's the first moment for you to sit back and pay attention to your child. Because these curves I'm talking about are the instrumental parenting functions, the protecting and directing, the managing of schoolwork, the watching the baby gates. All of this is about protecting our children from dangers and teaching and directing. But parents, these are not the only parenting activities. That's one basket. We'll call that instrumental parenting. But the other part of parenting that is so critical to your child is minding your child, having him in your mind, seeing him, understanding his experience and reflecting it back to him. We'll call it minding. Like, let's picture that boy. Let's say you didn't pick up your phone out of your pocket and you're just paying attention and you notice that he's trying to get up this 6 and 7, 8-year-old climbing structure. He's just 4. It's really challenging. And there's this moment where he has a speed wobble and you feel a little bit anxious for him, but you notice it's a sandy bottom. If he falls, it will hurt, but he'll be fine. So you let him challenge himself and you're watching. And what you notice is suddenly he navigates this huge jungle gym and he finds the magic trick and he gets over that tough section. And in 3 strides, he makes it all the way to the top of the structure. He's conquered Mount Everest. What's the first thing he does when he gets to the top? Every child does this. Mom, look, of course he does. He says, mind me. Mom, look. And if you've been there the whole time, I guarantee you go, yeah, wow, look at you. And when you see him, he sees himself. That's why every child in the world does this. They need that moment because actually when you see him, that's when he has a moment inside like, yeah, I'm a kid who climbs stuff. You confirm his sense of self. And yeah, and notice it's not praise, by the way. Well, it's different than praise. Praise is really not helpful to children. They don't need us to tell them how great they are. They need us to pay attention to who they are. And sometimes it's moments like this, and other times it's hard moments. They've just tripped over the crack running around, and he's going, "Ooh," and now we mind that. We say, ow, oh, sweetie, ouch. Same thing, reflecting right back what we're seeing, helping him understood that my mind's right here, I'm with you, and I'm helping you understand your own experience. When I see you, you see yourself. So these are the minding functions. And if you go back to my little curves, and I was talking about your parental curve, you've got to be 0% responsible for your child by the time he's 18. Guess what? The minding stays at 100% for life. And as you let go of the instrumental stuff, the minding opens up because I wasn't spotting him on the climbing structure, because I wasn't anxious. I let him take it on. I had all that room to mind him. But again, if I was on my cell phone, I wouldn't be minding him.
It's powerful. It reminds me, I was at swimming lessons recently, and there was a little girl in the pool in the same group as my son, and she was calling out to her mom to say, like, look what I can do, look what I can do. And the mom was reading a book on her phone or something on her phone and didn't even hear her child. Like, literally, like as if there was a brick wall there. We were behind a glass, and I kind of looked over to see if she would listen, and she didn't react. And it's one of those things where there's some parents who sit there and actively watch their children from the second they dip their toe into the water to the second they put their towel on when they leave. And there's some parents who take it as their own time. They're on their phones, they're on their readers, whatever, and they don't look up once.
And fair, like, and it's such a shame because that's what our kids need from us more than anything is our interested curiosity. Fair enough, though, parents. Like it is such a hard task. It is a grind. And if you've got a 4-year old and like no doubt you need a moment for yourself on that. Like I'm not like it's a real problem because parents have never had to work so hard. So, and here's yet another thing that I'm suggesting you need to do, which is to be present mentally, mind your child. But guys, that's where the fun is. The instrumental parenting is not particularly fun. Put your socks on. Did you get your mittens? Have you had, did you get it? No, like, don't forget to do your homework. You got to turn off your screen now. Like this is not the fun part of parenting. The minding part is where all the fun is. It's the best part of parenting.
Any takeaways that you want our parents to have, just generally speaking, who might feel like this is apathetic parent, like I don't want to use the word apathetic, but like not involved enough, too hands off. How do you find that medium?
Yeah, well, picking up on what we were just talking about, that what you realize, parents, is there's two baskets of parenting functions. The instrumental functions, those are the protecting and directing, the very active shaping of your child. And then there's this other basket, which I'm calling the minding basket. And when you don't actively manage your child out in the world, it doesn't mean that you're not parenting him anymore. It means you're opening up space to do this minding type of parenting. So it's not a kind of neglect at all. It's in some ways, for some parents, it's the hardest thing to do, to stay present, curious, and interested, and yet not be trying to affect the outcome. To let him muck around, even though I feel like I could make a really good suggestion or step in there, but actually just to step back and let him show me. It's not a neglect. It's a kind of benign presence.
And you mentioned earlier that this is arguably the hardest time for parents to parent. Is that due to screens, influence that comes from the screens? Is it due to everyone talking more about what their kids are going through? I know for me, we're seeing way more diagnoses in young children that I believe should have been made 20 years ago, but weren't. Is it because the parents are taking their kids to the doctor more? Like, what is this shift? Because it's a big question mark.
Yeah, it's a few things actually, and it's not the screens have not helped, but these issues that you're talking about started in the 90s and into the early 2000s. So before we had these kinds of little screens and before kids were really wired on screens, my kids were born in 94 and 96, and I didn't have nearly as difficult a time with screens as today's parents do. It just wasn't an issue. So what's it all about? A few different factors. Key. One, a loss of the village. Children, it really does take a village to raise a child. That's not a metaphor, it's literally true. You need external authority to be authoritative in kids' lives, like our little sandbox example illustrated. And there's fewer and fewer. And I know in Alberta, there's lots of smaller communities, and in Ontario too, rural communities. But in urban centers, especially, we're really losing the village, the neighborhood. And so sort of every family is its own little sort of bubble. Meanwhile, we've really turned education into an outright marks competition. We've taken a lot of the flow out of education. Flow, you can Google that concept from the social sciences. It's a really important concept. Flow is the mindset we're in whenever we're doing something because we're right into it. Flow is when you're right into what you're doing. The technical definition of a flow state is an activity engaged in for its intrinsic values. I'm doing it for the thing itself. Doing it gives me a sense of mastery, satisfaction, meaning, and purpose. So when your little guy goes to basketball and loves playing basketball, he's in a flow state. And believe it or not, children used to find flow at school. I know it's hard for modern parents to even believe that, but we've really turned it into a marks competition. And so it's not every student for himself, it's every family for itself now. It's a dog eat dog world. As this has happened, people's trust in external authority has diminished. So that's why I gave that sandbox example. We don't feel comfortable letting other people be authoritative in our children's lives. And it's essential, parents. When your children go off to school, you want school and the people at school to be gravity. Just like your child learning to trip over a crack when he's 4, you do want him to make a mistake in grade 5. Hopefully he does something stupid, because then the school can say, not okay. And he'll come home saying, oh my God, I was screwed. And he will learn, because we do learn from non-catastrophic painful failure. We don't learn when our mommy and daddies get in our face and say, you've been a bad boy. Then we just feel guilt, and we don't actually learn to take on the world. We feel small and depleted. So to answer your question, it's been a bunch of factors. We've really changed childhood, and then along come the screens. And the screens have just exacerbated all of these problems.
I agree with the village scenario there, that it does seem, especially post-COVID, the villages that we had spent so much time establishing, a lot of them went away, or the dynamic changed. But yeah, what's interesting is a lot of parents will come to Tutor Teach and looking for a tutor, and they'll say, I think I've realized my kid just won't learn from me as well as they'll learn from someone else. That is one of the number one comments we get from parents.
And it's the way it should be. It's much better that way. And not just learn, and that's true of learning math or science, but it's also really true in terms of learning how to deal with reality and develop adaptive anxiety. You do need external authority to be authoritative.
So for anyone listening who wants to learn more about you and your book, where can they do that?
Yeah, well, I have a book. It's called Drop the Worry Ball, How to Parent in the Age of Entitlement. You can always pick up a copy. And I've got a website. There's a TED Talk on there. So I guess those would be the best ways.
I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's so practical, and there's so much advice that resonates with parents that perhaps we don't always want to confront, or we don't know where to get the information from. So thank you so much for enlightening our listeners and for taking the time out of your day to do this call with us.
It was a total pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode of Parenting Adventures. Thanks for listening. We hope it gives you that extra bit of confidence that you need to conquer the road ahead. And if you're looking for academic support to ensure your kids thrive in school, visit tutorteach.ca to learn how we're here for families just like yours. We'll see you in the next episode.